Backstage with Mothership on Solid Rock Radio begins now. Hear the best in new music, artist interviews, stories from the road, and more. You are now backstage, and here's your host, Mothership.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's show. My guest Jake Jones and I have a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. Jake Jones, formerly of We As Human and still As We Ascend. There is still As We Ascend, isn't there?
There is still As We Ascend.
Well, I hadn't seen you in a long time, so we had a lot of catching up to do. So we've already done some catching up, but we're going to do some more so people can listen in. What's been going on with Jake Jones?
Oh my gosh. Cindy, have you ever had those weeks where you're like, this is just the craziest week of my whole life?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the next week after that week, have you ever said, oh my gosh, okay, now this is the craziest week of my whole life?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the week after that one, you're like, okay, wait a minute. No, this is the craziest week of my whole life.
Yeah? It's becoming a pattern, right?
Yeah. So that is my life. And I have my hands in so many pots right now. I feel like an octopus.
Okay. Well, where are we going to start? Are we going to start back at the beginning?
You mentioned We As Human, and that's how you know me. That's how I know you. And that's how I entered this world and got to know a lot of the friends that I have today in the rock world, in Christian music and non-Christian music and just music in general, but also the video world as well.
How long was We As Human out there on the road?
So that's an interesting question because the band itself existed under a couple of different names. But if I remember the story correctly, it was like 2000 or 2001 that they changed their name to We As Human. And they had very different members at that time, except for one backup singer who did all the rapping parts for their rap rock band that wished they could be Linkin Park. His name was Justin Cordell. And through the years, that kind of changed and they morphed into the band that people got to know. And so by 2006, I believe, they recorded their first real professional EP with Travis Wyrick, kind of under the supervision of Will McGinnis from Audio Adrenaline, as well as Michael Wittig. Kalel is what he went by forever from Pillar, Mike Wittig, and JMA Management. And so that happened in 06, and then 07, 08, 09, they toured that EP. And then in the fall of 2009, a fan of the band handed that EP off to the lead singer of a band called Skillet, named John Cooper. And sometime in that fall, winter, they found it laying around their tour bus and decided to put it on the sound system to get a good laugh. Because if I'm being honest, most of the time when a fan hands you an EP in an autograph line, it's usually pretty bad. We listened to every single one of those, and honestly, we're impressed by a lot of them, but sometimes they were pretty bad. And instead, John Cooper went online and downloaded the whole EP and put it on his workout playlist. And in January 2010 is when the band's guitarist had left, and they were kind of like, well, do we keep going or do we call it quits? They decided they were going to keep going, and they posted, there was this old website. Most of your listeners probably have never heard of it. It's called MySpace. And so they had posted a bulletin on MySpace looking for a new guitar player. They were up in North Idaho, like 30 minutes from the Canadian border, and I was probably 30 minutes from the Mexico border in New Mexico, and saw this bulletin saying, hey, we're looking for a new guitar player. And honestly, Cindy, I'm not the kind of person that blames everything on God, because honestly, he'd probably be pretty embarrassed by a lot of the silly things I do every day. But this was one of those moments in my life, one of the probably 2 or 3 moments of my entire life where I knew for a fact that this was something that God kind of smacked me upside the head and said, this is you, go. And so I responded to this bulletin from this silly band up in North Idaho that really had a whole lot of nothing going on, and said, hey, this is what I do. I play guitar, I write songs. I would love to join your band. About a month later, they accepted me into the band, but last minute, they had also gotten a MySpace message from another guy who was a little closer to home named Justin Forshaw, who happened to be this phenomenal guitarist. And they had already decided that they wanted to bring me in because they just liked me. It definitely wasn't because of my guitar playing skills. Then they saw him play and were like, okay, what if we get both of these guys? And that's what they did. So Justin Forshaw and I both joined the band February 15th, 2010, officially as their new guitar players. And it was April 2010 that we got our first email from a gentleman named Zach Kelm, who said, hey, I run a management company. I manage a band called Skillet. Their lead singer, John Cooper, has been listening to your EP and he loves it. And we'd like to talk to you about maybe kind of forming a new management company and pulling you guys in as our flagship band. And that really kicked it all off for us and kind of the rest of the world as far as signing on with Atlantic Records and becoming, a national touring act.
What happened to We as Human? Give us kind of an idea of what went on.
Well, I want to be as respectful as possible, but as honest as possible. So that being said, I will say this. Our lead singer, Justin Cordell, he had ownership of the name. And this is pretty typical nowadays. When a record label, especially a big record label, signs a band, it's a lot of headache to sign a contract with all 5 members. That's, a 300, 400 page contract times 5 that is different for each member. And so to save them the hassle, what they'll do typically is they'll sign the lead singer as the band. They dissolved the LLC that was We as Human and instead changed it to something called an S Corp. And so he had full ownership of the band. And then we all had individual contracts just to him called a leaving member agreement. And so long story short, they turned us from band members into hired band members, which was kind of silly. And sure, our feelings were maybe a little bit hurt. But overall, we understood that it is saving a lot of time and attorney fees and things. And so with that being said, there was a point in time where Justin Cordell, he just had other things going on in his life and decided that he didn't want to do We as Human any longer. And so I will say, just kind of guess maybe in defense of the band as a whole, we were not prepared to say no, to leave it behind. But at the end of the day, with him really being the voice of the band, and no matter which way you spin it, the lead singer is always the face of the band, the character of the band. You can try hiring a new lead singer, but it just doesn't really work. And so, we knew that when he decided to say no more, that was going to be the end of it. And there was a lot of heartache and a lot of heartbreak there. But it's been a while. That happened at the tail end of 2015, and there's been a lot of grace, a lot of love, a lot of forgiveness there, and we've learned to move on. And are honestly, I couldn't say that I'm not happy with where God's taken my life and where things are today. But that's kind of what happened. I have to look back at it and say, well, I trust God that He knows what He was doing there, and He's continued to take care of me and my family ever since. Okay.
Well, that chapter was over. What did you do next?
Well, so we were literally like 3 days away from flying out to LA to record the sophomore album for We as Human. We had all these songs ready to go, so that wasn't going to happen, the day that everything kind of came to a screeching halt. So we knew we had a lot of fans, quite literally like hundreds of thousands of fans just on social media, not to mention the people that weren't on social media that were rip-roaring and ready for a new record. And so by that time, our drummer had moved out to LA, gotten married, and started a new life. Our bassist had moved up to North Idaho with his wife, and they had a kid on the way. And so really it was just Justin Forshaw and me that were left. And we couldn't keep We as Human, that name left with our singer. And so we decided, hey, we've got these people that want music, and we want to do our best to kind of give them what we feel like is rightfully theirs. They've earned it by sticking around this long. So let's put out some new tunes. And we really had a good time doing it. We formed a band and kind of gave it to our fans to say, hey, what should we be called? We really just put it up to people and said, hey, here are some names that we like. Which one is your favorite? And they picked the name As We Ascend.
So how many albums did As We Ascend have?
So As We Ascend has released one album. It was St. Patrick's Day 2017. We put out Farewell to Midnight, which is funny because the name that we as a band liked the most was Farewell to Midnight, which was one of the names that people had put out. And the name everyone picked was As We Ascend. And so we decided to name the album Farewell to Midnight. And we did not plan it at the time, but it wound up being the perfect name for the record, because if I could start today with what I know and who I am and what I've learned and write that record again, there's a lot of things I would do differently. However, at that time, we were very hurt. We were hurt that the band was over. There were a lot of things that we didn't understand, and we're very frustrated and a lot of emotions. My father had just taken his life, kind of actually in the process of working on that record. And so a lot of those songs are full of hurt, of anger, of pain, but also real life things that we know that people go through every day. People lose friends, people lose family, people go through stuff. And so that's where that record came from. And so we named it Farewell to Midnight. And step one was planting our flag and saying, we don't want to ever tour. We're not a touring band. That's not what we do. We've done that before. And then the first thing we did was went on tour.
Backstage with Mothership returns after this. Outperformance Shop is a proud supporter of Solid Rock Radio. They specialize in retail and wholesale of automotive high-performance racing and off-road products. They also carry a variety of accessories from remote control cars to rock and roller multi-carts. On the web at outperformance.com. Check us out on Facebook at I'm with Mothership.
You mentioned the death of your father, and you and I have had this discussion privately. I also have family members who've taken their life. For a creative, what was that like in your process of writing music to get that emotion and that feeling? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting question because there was a totally different guy who was trying to put a band together to do a tour, and he had gone to his producer, Robert Venable, and said, hey, do you know a guitarist and a bassist that you could put together to do this tour? And so he called me and said, hey, do you think you and Justin Forshaw might like to do this tour for this band called Future Leaders of the World? And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. And so we had gotten together for the first time. Justin and I had driven to the studio that Robert Venable was working out of to have our first ever rehearsal. And it was the first time either of us had ever played music with Robert. And so we had a wonderful rehearsal, and I was getting back in, Justin was my ride, and we were going to go back to his house to have dinner. My wife was already there with our kids waiting, and I was getting in his vehicle, and I saw that I had a whole bunch of missed calls from my wife. And so I tried calling her back, and she denied my call and then started sending me these very strange text messages that I didn't understand, and finally convinced her to call me. And that's when she delivered the news, hey, your dad, he took his life. And I think that that's just kind of poetic in and of itself, because it was the first time I'd ever played music with Robert Venable, and I had no idea at that moment that one day he would be in the band, that I would have the opportunity to really work through that hurt and anguish. But no, as a creative, instantly I was very angry. I will never forget my reaction in that moment. I was sitting in Justin's passenger seat in his Jeep, and I lost it. And when I say lost it, I didn't cry. I was mad. I felt like it was a very crappy thing of my father to do. I felt like it was very selfish, and I was very mad. And that was just my initial reaction. And kind of in the wake of it, of course, I was very sad, but also really didn't understand it. It was the day before his birthday. I'd gotten a notification on my computer that it was going to be his birthday the next day, and thought to myself, I should call him today before I forget. But I didn't, and kind of blamed myself a little bit, like, well, maybe if I had called him, maybe I would have caught him, and maybe he would have changed his mind, and just those kinds of things that run through your head. And I think that runs through the head of anyone who's been in that situation. It was just weeks, if not a month or two after that I got a Twitter message from a gal who had no idea that this had happened. But she had come to a concert that We As Human played in 2013. I'll never forget it. It was in Milwaukee. We were at a venue called The Rave, and it was Halloween night. And we were on tour with Filter. And then the direct support band was a band called Fight or Flight. So it was like the guys from Disturbed. So we were super excited. But there was this gal there and a friend of hers, and we had known her for a while. And she was really sad. Sounds strange to say, but that wasn't abnormal. To have someone kind of, having an emotional response to the music or the evening or whatever it was. But I remember this one in particular because we kind of sat at the back of the venue, and I remember her just crying. And that's all I remember. But she sent me this Twitter message 3, 4, 5 years later and said, hey, I just wanted to tell you thank you for that night and the words that you said to me, which, Cindy, I'll tell you to this very day, I don't remember a word I uttered to her. But she said, if it weren't for what you said that night, I wouldn't be here today, because what no one else knew was that evening I had a note in my back pocket, and I had very much planned out to walk out of that concert that evening and end my life. And I intended for someone to find that note and to know, just kind of how I felt about the world. But it was your words that evening that convinced me to stick around. And she went on to tell me all of these things in her life, that she had an opportunity to experience the birth of her nephew and graduating high school and then graduating college and getting to see her grandmother turn, whatever age it was. It was just all of these things that brought her joy, but also brought joy to others that she would not have been around to experience if she had ended her life that evening. And that was very humbling for me. And I thought, here's an opportunity to take my father's poor choices and tell someone who might be considering the same thing, like, you want to do this? You really want to go through this? Let me just explain to you for a moment how this doesn't help you, and it definitely doesn't help anyone else. No one wins. No one wins when you make that choice. However, if you choose to stick around, here's some of the great things that can happen. And so it was through that we wrote the song called When the Gun Goes. And funny story with that song, if you listen through the bridge, and there's this kind of like build up and then a quick break. It's actually in that song is the recording of my father's very last voicemail he ever left me. And I did a fun trick that I actually kind of stole from the producer of a band called Red, where I took the song. If you listen to it on a cell phone or you listen to it in a situation where it's not stereo, you don't hear it. It cancels itself out. But if you listen to it with headphones, so it's private, it's just you and the song, then you can hear it.
Wow.
And it's my dad just telling me that he loves me and asking me to call him back. And I never did. That's something, I think about to this day. But that's kind of how it hit me. All I can do in that situation is try and say, well, how can I help someone else and try and save a life through this tragedy?
What kind of encouragement would you give someone who might be having those types of feelings right now?
I had experienced depression prior to that, and I didn't even know what it was. I was feeling this sadness and was quite frustrated with this feeling and didn't know how to make it go away. It seemed like it was kind of for no reason. And I didn't know that is what depression is. Since going through counseling, they say that there's something called circumstantial depression, which means that you're sad because something bad has happened. And that's normal. If you should feel sad when something bad happens. If you don't, then that's a whole other issue. But then there's kind of this sadness that just doesn't go away. And that is, chronic depression is what that is. And it's something that I had experienced from time to time. But then after kind of going through this with my dad and then shortly after losing my mother, I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to turn out like my dad. I know how much hurt and sadness that left me as well as my entire family. But when you're in that moment, it's scary. And when you're in that moment, you're not thinking about those things. And Cindy, I'll tell you something I've never told anyone before, besides my wife, my counselor. But there was an evening in particular that I grabbed my firearm that I keep for protection, and I took it to my vehicle and I started the car and I drove away, and I thought, well, I'm never coming back. And it was that night that I scared myself finally so much that I realized I need help. And I didn't know who to go to. I didn't know who to ask. I didn't know what the appropriate thing to do was. And so there happened to be a walk-in medical clinic in my town. And I just walked in and just signed my name on the paper and said, I don't even know if this is where I'm supposed to be. I don't know who to talk to, but I really need help. I have this sadness that's so deep, I can't even explain it. And I don't know who to talk to. I don't even know what to say, but I just need help. And it's amazing because those people are trained to understand when someone comes and tells them those things. But most importantly, what really surprised me in that was that's not the first time that doctor's heard that. And I felt like maybe I'm the only person in the world who's ever felt this way, who could possibly understand the way that I feel. And it was only through that I realized, like, no, this is okay. It's okay to feel this way. You shouldn't feel ashamed to feel this way. However, you should get help, and that's completely okay. And so what wound up happening through that, Cindy, is I spoke with a counselor and someone who was just so gracious and so caring and willing to listen to me. And, my biggest fear was like, well, I'm supposed to be a man. I'm supposed to be the man of my house. I've got a wife and kids and I'm the breadwinner and blah, blah, blah. And here I am being a sissy having these emotions. It was someone who could level with me and say, listen, I understand those things, but you're not doing them much good if you're not around anymore, right? And so I'm not saying this is the answer for everyone, or I don't even know if this is the answer for most people. But for me in particular, they wound up putting me on a medication. I was super scared. I asked to be put on the lowest dose possible because I thought, I don't want to have to depend on some kind of medicine to, be able to get through life. The best way I've ever heard it explained to me was a diabetic, they don't get to choose whether or not they get put on insulin. That's something they're born with, this issue. And they have two options. They can either take their medication and live or not and not live. Chronic depression is not wholly unlike that. For some people, that's the right thing, and there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. And so, I learned that was for me, and I even for a little while was like, oh, I'm feeling great. I think I'm okay now. I've gotten through all these things. I've worked through them. I'm gonna go ahead and quit my medication now. And I realized, like, nope, the only reason I feel great right now is because I'm on medication. But it doesn't mean I'm weak. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that at all. Sometimes our brains just don't put out the right things the right way. Unfortunately, the side effect of that happening can bring us to a place where we have been fooled, deceived into believing that the world is better off without us. And the truth is that's just not right. You are a bigger pain in the neck dead than you are alive, no matter how bad it gets. I promise. I can tell you this firsthand, going through that with my dad, and I'd rather put up with his mess alive, for sure.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who are depressed or are having those kind of feelings isolate themselves when what they actually need is to reach out to somebody and to be with somebody. Your gut feeling is the opposite of what needs to happen.
Well, and, I can only speak for myself, but I was ashamed. And when I say ashamed, I was embarrassed. I thought, man, this is stupid. Like, no, come on now. Like, suck it up, Jake. You got this. Don't be a complainer. Nobody wants to hear that. And little did I know that I was just inches away from taking away my little girl's daddy, to taking away my wife's husband because of my foolish pride and thinking that somehow it was not smart for me to reach out and get help. And I'm really thankful that I did. And I didn't know that I could feel normal again until I finally did. So that's my encouragement to anyone. I think the foolish thing to do is to think that you can handle it on your own. We were never meant to handle this world by ourselves. And that doesn't necessarily mean medication. In my case, it did. But definitely we are not meant to take this alone.
Well, I appreciate you opening up and sharing, because I'm sure there's some people who need to hear that.
Well, and I'm
right
always
now.
open. I'm always happy to love on people and share my story, for sure.
You're listening to Backstage with Mothership on Solid Rock Radio. Check us out on Facebook at I'm with Mothership.
All right, well, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Tell me some of your favorite festivals that you've played.
A festival that stands out that every time I've ever played it has always been amazing. There are two. The first one being a live festival in Ohio. Mm-hmm. The second one being Uprise Festival in Pennsylvania. Now, that's not to say that there's not been other festivals that have been wonderful, but when you kind of reach a certain level, you might play the same festival each year. And some years it's amazing, and some years, no one shows up or whatever it is maybe. But those are two festivals that it never mattered how well we were performing on the charts, doing air quotes here with my fingers. But people have just always showed up and been so gracious. So I think those are two places that have always been at least my personal two favorites.
Well, we've talked about touring, so we've got to also ask my favorite question, what is your favorite road snack?
Oh, my favorite road snack. This is dangerous. This is dangerous because if I answer, then I'm going to get a whole bunch of it. Carrots. Carrots are my favorite road snack. No, Reese's Pieces, man. There's just nothing better. I love Reese's Pieces. Listen, there was one year where I think we only played like 5 or 6 shows. We did like a short little run, and I came home with 12 boxes of Reese's Puff cereal. And that is not a complaint. I would do that again. That is my favorite version of Reese's, is Reese's Puff cereal. I love cereal. I eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner probably most days if it doesn't show. #DadBod.
That's easy enough. There are other things you do besides As We Ascend. There's Jake Jones Productions, but I hear there's some changes coming. So I want you to kind of lay all that out for me.
Yeah, so what a lot of people don't know is that long before I was ever in a band, long before I was ever touring, I was at the ripe old age of 18 years old. I purchased a house and I renovated half of it and turned it into a recording studio. In fact, I sold my very first car ever to buy my first chunk of recording equipment. So I have been recording and producing music really since I was a really young kid. And that's actually what I was doing when I joined We As Human. And I thought, well, I'm going to be super famous and rich from this rock band, so I'm not going to worry about recording. I'll do that whenever it's time to retire. And that wasn't true. So I busted out the mics again and started doing that. So I launched Jake Jones Productions officially, I guess, in 2014, really alongside doing music for my church and for my friends. And naturally, I think, and this is kind of something I live by, if you do good work, people will notice. Long story short, it's kind of at a place now where I find myself busier doing film production work and that sort of thing than I am even doing music. I know I've caught a little bit of shade being known in this world for being a musician, especially a touring musician, and then getting into music production and then getting into the film world. But what most people don't know is that I was doing both of those things for many years before I was ever on the road as a guitar player. And it's not so much that I utilized my platform as a touring musician to transition into these other areas, but rather I took a break from those other areas to become a touring musician. And now I'm just returning back. Honestly, they're things I feel far more comfortable doing than being on the road and headbanging. Now I'm working with labels like Capitol and Sony, and I'm doing really big projects. It's been a wild ride. So Jake Jones Productions has morphed into Acceleration Media, which still encompasses the music production work that I do. And I'm still working with lots of bands and got something coming up on the horizon with Relentless Flood. I still love doing that work. It's kind of where we're at today.
Now, what happened to Turned Up Podcast?
So Turned Up has, as far as I know, officially come to an end, but not because we don't want to do Turned Up Podcast anymore, but rather we've kind of expanded into doing more than just music stuff. We still want to talk about music industry things. However, we were starting to kind of feel a little limited because we'd kind of talked about everything that we knew about sound and music as far as the behind the scenes goes, but instead we're kind of broadening our horizon and launching a podcast this fall called That's Why. Basically, the premise of the podcast is we just ask why about some of the most mundane and some of the craziest things that you could possibly think of. We're also going to be launching a video element along with that. And so we'll still have the typical podcast format, but also a video, YouTube kind of show that goes along with it. So I'm excited to be working on that this summer.
So many exciting things going on. So I'm going to ask a question that fans are going to ask. Is there any possibility of As We Ascend doing any shows, maybe one-offs or something?
Yes. At the moment, I live here in Tennessee. Our drummer, Robert, of course, he lives just up the road from me, but he's working like 5 or 6 days a week out in LA audio engineering with Kelly Clarkson. In fact, I just found out today that he's been nominated for an Emmy Award.
Wow.
And then Justin Forshaw, he lives up in the Seattle, Washington area. And I know he's got a business that's just exploding up there. He does the most beautiful finishing work on homes. So it's really hard to get us all on the same page. And, for scheduling, we are throwing around ideas of new music. We're working on different things. It's something we have a desire to do for sure. Okay. It's now just a matter of timing, unless a matter of do we want to? Absolutely, we want to. And it's something we're working towards, but it's a little tricky.
Okay, there it is, people. I appreciate you being part of our Grizzly Awards. You did a great job.
Man, what an honor. I don't think I've ever been more excited to be a part of something. I truly believe in what the Grizzly Awards is. I think it's long overdue, and I'm so excited to see such a wonderful group of people who are pouring into a community that has meant so much to me my entire life. All I could wish to do is pour back into that community with everything I've got.
You almost didn't make it to the Grizzly Awards.
Oh my gosh.
Joel's like, Jake's not going to make it. I'm like, what? Tell that story.
So it's time to do the Grizzly Awards, and Middle Tennessee has just gotten hit with a massive snowstorm. My driveway was covered in just a solid sheet of ice. And I live south of Nashville. I live on 4 acres. It's beautiful. But my driveway is a very, very steep driveway with a 90-degree curve right in the middle of it. It's very narrow, and it's covered in trees, which means that while the rest of the world thaws out, my driveway does not. In fact, we hadn't been able to leave for days, and I needed some groceries. And so I go ahead and take the car down. We have a Chevy Traverse, doesn't have 4-wheel drive. Get it out of the driveway, and the road wasn't too bad. Get to the grocery store, pick up the necessities, get to the bottom of my driveway, and I'm trying to make it up the driveway, and my vehicle can't do it, and instead starts sliding backwards and sideways. Now, thank goodness I'm eventually able to get it stopped. However, when I get it stopped, it is completely sideways and blocking my entire driveway. And if it moves in either direction, it's going to flip over and wind up in this very steep ditch. And so it's that bad. So I was stuck. However, it's time for the Grizzlies, and I can't drive my other car out of the driveway because my other car is blocking it. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so thank goodness Adrian drives down to Columbia and is willing to pick me up and take me to Franklin to the studio there. But I made it, and I was honored to be there.
Well, it was wonderful to see you rushing through the door. Another story I wanted to share. Uprise Festival, that time that I needed to get to main stage and I didn't have a path. And You had a pass. So we ran as fast as this poor old handicapped woman can run.
Listen, I just felt like it was just a crime that you didn't have a pass. I thought clearly this was an oversight by someone here that Mothership does not have a pass right now. Seriously, I was more than happy to do it. And I think I even left it with you. And I think you brought it back to me later, which was so sweet, but so unnecessary.
It was not just an all access, it was an artist pass, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay. You said this was like your first uprise as we ascend.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
And you did not put it on your wrist because you were going to keep it as a keepsake.
Yes. Yep.
And you had to put it on my wrist so I could get on main stage to film Dan Johnson playing drums for Red. And so I felt bad about that because I had your keepsake. So like 3 weeks later, we went to Germany, and at Loud and Proud, I handed you your keepsake, although it was not pristine. But.
I have it here, probably within arm's reach. I'm looking for it right now, but I think it's in my backpack that I keep my film audio equipment in. Listen, I was super happy to let you have it, or let you use it, for sure.
Well, thank you again for that. Next question. What are the top 3 things on your bucket list?
Top 3 things on my bucket list. Become an airline pilot.
Okay.
Skydive.
Okay.
Have speaking lines in a top tier Hollywood film.
Bam, there it is. Okay. Thank you so much for catching me up.
Well, Cindy, it is always an honor every time I get to sit and talk with you. And I'm just happy to be able to do it in this format. I love what you do. I love all the things that you're involved in. I love that you have a heart for the rock and roll community. And I'm just honored to be able to call you friend and to be able to call you my very own Mothership.
Oh, that's so sweet. I'm excited too. I don't know what the Lord's got in mind and what he wants me to do, but if I can make the difference in one band or one life, then I've succeeded.
A rock only has to hit the water once for the ripples to just keep going, right? So,
amen. All right, man. Good night, and we will hopefully see you soon.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Love and God bless you guys and you and everything you're doing, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Love you too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening tonight. Stay tuned for more great music all night long. Be sure to check out my I'm With Mothership Facebook page and Solid Rock Radio's website. Follow the link under shows to Backstage with Mothership, which will have the links to my guests' social media accounts. This show will be replayed at 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Past interviews available on podcast.solidrockradio.org, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on Pandora platforms. And remember this week, be kind to one another.